All right, guys. Today we're going to be talking about kind of cordage and then how it ties into trapping. So I got several cordages to kind of talk to you guys about, but today we're going to be using some cedar. So I'm processing this cedar down, and I want to get it soft enough to twist. Cedar makes a spectacular cordage for this specific trap, which is the Paiute Deadfall, which we're making here shortly. We want to get this cordage processed down though to a point where I can twist it. It's pretty stiff right now. This is both outer and inner bark of the cedar. So I'm going to process this down, and we don't need a very long piece for the Paiute, but I want to get this process down so it's easier to twist using the reverse 2-ply twist or twist overlay method. So I'll process it down a little bit, and again, it doesn't need to be very robust for this trap. But what I want to do is I want to take that cordage and fold it in half here. These ends should be, one end should be a little bit longer than the other when I start. I'm going to twist this bark to get her started, and then I'm going to twist away and then twist towards, and then twist away, twist towards, twist away, twist towards. And using that technique, you can see how the cordage starts to manifest using that same twist away, twist towards. And I drive my index finger in so I can pull pressure away as well as pressure, kind of counter pressure there to get that nice tight bite on that reverse 2-ply twist. So I'll just continue that away and towards as I go down the piece of cedar. Okay. Now when I get to the end and it's time to add more material, I will splice material in. And I got this extra material here kind of under my arm. I'll usually stage it close by so I can splice that in. Now you see, as we've already got to the end here, we got a nice, piece of cordage in very short order. I'm going to bring this down, and you notice our ends are getting closer. This end is shorter than the other end. I'm going to split this down a little bit because this is still pretty robust. This end is longer than this end. I'm going to take a piece of cordage here, and I'm going to add this. So this is kind of a V. I'm going to make a U out of this, and I'm going to lay, this is my long side, I'm going to lay the short with the long, and I'm going to take this longer side and lay it with the short side. That way my splice is carried over distance, which strengthens the cordage over time and locks in that splice. So I'm going to lay that right in there, and then I'm going to grab this whole bundle and twist away and then twist towards. And then I just continue to move down that piece of cordage until I get down to the end and I'm ready to splice again. And by splicing just a small piece of cordage in there to continue that length, I maintain diameter. And that's what I'm really trying to do here, is make a uniform piece of cordage that's uniform throughout, as opposed to having, bulky aspects of the cordage where those splices are. That splice almost becomes invisible as I twist, which is what I'm looking for here. So I'll make my way down to the end again, and I'm going to splice one more time. Right, I make it to the end here, right? We have our long, we have our short. I'll take another piece of cordage here. I'll lay the short sides on the top this time, so I'll lay the long here. I'll bring the short around with this one, and then I'll continue to twist. And that way we can maintain that uniform diameter throughout. And in very short order, notice how this is getting a little thinner here, so I can take a piece of cordage there and I can add to that. So we have our long, we have our short. I throw a long on that side, short on this side, and I continue to splice or continue to twist after the splice. All right, guys, so we just finished that cedar bark here. I'm up on the porch to showcase kind of the different ways that you can use that technique from different materials. So obviously we use a natural material here, cedar. Here's another natural material, long piece of cordage. This is kind of what I was talking about before. This is wisteria, and I made a very, very long piece of wisteria here. And then I can then coil this up or back feed it and then as I need this cordage, I can go ahead and cut off what I need from the cordage. So as I move along, I need this much for a trap. I just tie an overhand knot in here, cut this away, and I can use this piece of cordage. That way I'm not cutting all the cordage up at once, and I can continue to use this as a resource. But using that technique, you can use a lot of different materials, not just natural, but man-made. So you have natural, man-made, and animal type cordages, hair, sinew, and hide or buckskin or rawhide to make cordage out as well from the animal product. But this would be an example of a man-made cordage. This is just flagging tape that found doing a woods walk, took the flagging tape and twisted it up. Now, something to consider when using this is there's a element of stretch here you have to consider if you're using this for trapping or anything like that. But this makes a fantastic lash for packs and things of that sort. So again, with the Hoboforge mantra, look at things for what they can be, not for what they are. We look at this flagging tape as a potential resource for cordage. Another one would be either trash bags or Walmart sacks. These are fantastic cordage, great amount of tensile strength here, great for packs, lashings, and things of that sort. So these are all over the place, and by making cordage out of things like this, we're actually helping out by using trash that we find laying around and repurposing it into a situation where I or you can use that to facilitate a need. So another great cordage material using that technique, the reverse two-ply twist. Out on this Hoboforge Survival School property today, we're doing Paiute Deadfall is our kind of class of the day. I found this dead stick. I'm going to harvest my materials I need for the Paiute off of this. I always want to try to use down dead material as opposed to cutting down anything live. What I'm looking for here is 3 basic sticks to build this trap. I need a fulcrum stick, I need a bait stick, and I need my Y stick. So this stick could easily perform the job of the bait stick, and I'm going to harvest this quite long, and I'll explain why when we get back over to our crush, our rock that we're going to actually use for our Paiute. I need a Y stick here, so I got a good Y here, so I'll break this off, and then I'll come up here and I'll break this off, and then I'll break this off, which kind of gives me the Y I'm looking for here. Now the length I want this to get, the angle I'm looking for here is about 7 inches. So from the Y down, that's about 7 inches using my hand to measure here. That's so your hand kind of same. Use your pinky and your thumb to establish that distance, and then I'll come down here and I'll break this off here. Another reason I use dead materials is because you haven't seen me use my knife at all at this point, right? And that's why I'm a big fan of the Paiute as a trap, because I don't really need to use my knife for a lot of the work here. So if you find yourself in a situation where you don't own a Hoboforge knife, you can get this done without a knife. So I'm going to break this down, and there's my Y. And I just want to kind of strip off any of these smaller branches. I can just put them up on a tree, and I can break those off there. Anything that could impede that trap from actually going off, I can put those on there and kind of knock those down. The next thing I need is my fulcrum stick, and I'm going to harvest that one, and it needs to be about the same length from that bottom of the Y to the bottom. That's what I want about for my fulcrum stick, and I'm going to try to take the straightest portion of this stick, because you see we got a bend here, and then it kind of comes straight, and then we got another bend. So I'll put that on the straightest portion here and kind of mark that, and then I'll break it there, and then I'll bring that back up to about there. That's my straight portion, kind of come down to that bottom, and then I'll break that there. And then we have roughly what we're looking for as far as length. I can break that top off, and there's my fulcrum stick. And here is my bait stick, which will also be able to harvest the trigger out of that. So we got all this. Let's head back and set. All right, guys, we're back here where we're going to actually assemble this Paiute Deadfall. I was talking about the length of our bait stick here, and that's going to be directly proportionate to the engine or the crush potential of our engine, which is in this case is the cinder block here. So this thing's going to fall, and it's designed to get the animal all the way in depth to this, so the animal doesn't have time to get out before it crushes the animal. So I want to ensure that my bait stick is at least 80% length of the actual crush potential here. So I'll lay my stick here, and I'll come down to this end, about 80% length. That gets it all the way in depth to the back of the rock, and I'm going to break it off there. All right, I'm going to save this. The rest of the stick here is going to become my actual trigger itself. So here's my bait stick. I get that squared away, and I want to get this back kind of flattened off. So again, I'll use this rock I have here, or the cinder block, and I'll flatten that off using this to abrade that into a flatter edge where it's going to marry up with my trigger. Once I have that assembled, so I got my bait stick sized for my engine. Now I've got my trigger into my cordage here, and that's stable. I'm going to take the cordage, and I'm going to use this to establish the distances on the actual trap itself. So this is a game of angles. This is our 90, and the cordage is going to be our 45. So I only want to introduce about a thumbnail worth of my fulcrum stick into the Y. I want to kind of take a picture of that 90-degree angle in my head, and then I'll take that fulcrum stick out, and I'll come down here and take my trigger, wrap it around my Y stick in its final, where it's going to be finally placed, and then I'll bring the cordage up to that spot where that 90 was on my fulcrum stick, and I'll mark that with my fingers. That's going to give me a good idea of where my tie-off point, very, very close to where my tie-off point is going to be. So I'll pinch that with my fingers, and then in the back of my fulcrum stick, back to where the tie-off is going to be, I'm going to run that on the edge of my stone here, and I'm going to create a little bit of a stop. Notice again, I haven't even pulled out my pocket skinner to do any work. Once I create that stop, that's where I'm going to tie my cordage off to. I'll lay it in that stop. I'll bring it around. Now I got enough cordage here, I could probably do a clove hitch, but I'm just going to tie off with a simple overhand knot on the back of this and tie it off so I can check length. Now I want to make sure my knot is oriented down, so as the string pulls, it pulls the stick straight down. If it's off to the side, it's going to pull off to the side, and it's going to be harder to assemble my trap. So once I get that tied, I'm going to assemble my trap, and I'm going to check my angles. I'm going to introduce that through, make sure my knot's facing straight down. I'm going to bring my trigger around, and I'm going to set my trigger. All right, as I apply upward force on this, as if the engine was pressing down on the actual fulcrum stick, I'm checking this distance. Now I can see I can actually tighten this up just a little bit because I've got a little bit of rise on the fulcrum stick. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to feed a little bit of a cordage through here so I can tighten that up. Once I get that tight, I can bring this, the tail around. And if it's short enough, I can actually leave it hanging as long as it's not hanging down, because I don't want the animal chewing on this. Or if it's very long, I can actually go back and tie the clove hitch or secure it on itself if I have enough of a tail. So we'll see if we can tuck that underneath there and secure that around our fulcrum stick. Okay, now I'm going to assemble my trap. I want to make sure my trigger stick has a nice sharp edge on it so it can grab one of these ridges that are on the cinder block underneath. So take a good look at your engine, whatever rock you're using, and make sure there's a spot that your trigger stick can grab. And you'll be able to see this as we get a little bit closer as I'm setting this. So I've got all the trap assembled. I can build this, and now I can actually move to where the animals are. I'm looking for track, scat, animal presence. I'm looking for Engines in the woods. Obviously, I'm not going to carry a ton of rocks where I want to go trap. I'm going to try to exploit where the rocks are and move those only a short distance if I have to target the game that I'm after. And in this case, in this size trap, we're after pack rat, ground squirrel, maybe a bird, something like that, depending on what kind of bait we can actually bait the trap with. Okay, guys, I'm going to take the trap now. I've got my Y. I've got my fulcrum stick. I'm gonna place that Y directly up against the rock here. I want it touching the rock. I introduce that thumb, just that thumb of the fulcrum stick there, making sure my knot in the rear is facing down, and I'm gonna elevate my rock and tilt my Y forward. All right, notice that action. It's against the rock, I raise, I tilt. I set the rock on my fulcrum stick. That's step one. Step two, I'm going to apply downward pressure on the fulcrum stick to add slack to my rope and to my trigger. I'll feed my trigger around and lock my trigger on the opposite side. That's step two. I can then remove my hand and move down because the trigger is actually holding the trap together. I'm then going to grab my bait stick. Remember, my pointy stick goes towards the inside of the trap and my flat side goes up against my trigger. I'm then going to place the bait stick in the trap and I'm going to fish around to find that good stop point. When I do, I'm going to move the back of the bait stick against the trigger and then I'm out and the trap is set. Okay, guys, now that the trap is set, I want to talk about, because I got both hands here, I can talk about actually how I want this animal to approach this trap and how I'm going to channelize this off to direct the animal the direction I want it to go. Okay, so I have two different entry points here on the trap. I can enter from the left or from the right. I want in the way this trigger is set and the bait stick is set, I want the animal to come in from this side. That means I need to block this entire side off. And the reason being is my bait stick goes all the way in depth and it cheats more to the right side. If you have the animal come in on the right side, the animal can actually bump off of your bait stick early and knock your trap off and be able to get out before they get caught. But if they come in from the left side, they can go all the way in depth, all the way back to the bait, which is all the way 80% depth, like we talked about, of our engine. So I want to bring them in from the left side, which means I need to channelize all the way up to the front, leaving an entry point here next to my trigger, so the animal transitions all the way underneath, all the way back to the bait stick, as opposed to coming in this side and tripping the trap early. Now let's look at what it looks like when the trap goes off. Okay, guys, now we have our trap channelized, and you can see we have our doorway here, as I talked about, on the side that we want the animal to enter from. Now, I've taught this trap for years, and you know, when you test this trap, which is absolutely essential to assessing whether or not your trap's put together properly, is when you test it, you need to act as the animal. If you come in and you set this trap off here, then you're basically trying to replicate the trap going off too early. So what you want to do is act like the animal, transition all the way to the back of the trap to where the bait would be to set the trap off.